The Vatican archives consist of 53 linear miles of shelves packed full with manuscripts and books collected over the course of 1,200 years. This incredible archive is believed to conceal more mysteries than any researcher could possibly dream of. But it is so secret that not even the highest Roman Catholic Church archivists know what is kept in the archive, which are stored near the Sistine Chapel. But recently, a new artificial intelligence project called In Codice Ratio began work on the collections of the Vatican secret archives, hoping to solve some of its mysteries. What will this fascinating new project reveal about the Vatican archives? The Vatican archives. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, known until very recently as the Vatican Secret Archive, contains 35,000 volumes of catalogue dating back 12 centuries, stored in an incredible 53 miles of shelving worth of documents. Such are the legends associated with the archive that for many years some doubted whether it existed at all. The archive's indexes are housed in a highly sacred part of the Vatican, next door to the Apostolic Library and just north of the Sistine Chapel, and are not available to the general public. They're only accessible to scholars of at least 75 years of age. In the 17th century, under the orders of Pope Paul V, the secret archive was separated from the Vatican Library. The archives were designed to hold the official paperwork of the Holy See, the central governing body of the Catholic Church, along with correspondence and other information related to the Pope. They also contain some of the Catholic Church's most extraordinary treasures, including rare documents dating back as far as the 8th century. Up until the late 19th century, no one at all outside the Vatican, including respected Christian scholars, was allowed access to the archive. But in 1881, Pope Leo XIII, an intellectual who wanted to modernize some aspects of the Church, opened the Vatican archive to researchers. For many researchers, one of the highlights of the archive is a letter from Mary, Queen of Scots, who, after being held in custody for almost 20 years, was executed after being forced to abdicate her throne. She had been sentenced to death for conspiring to murder her Protestant cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Facing imminent execution, Mary wrote a despairing letter to Pope Sixtus V, pleading for her life and criticizing the heretics who wanted to kill her. The Pope did not answer the letter, and Mary was beheaded on the 8th of February, 1587. The archive also holds notes from the trial against the 17th century Italian astronomer, physicist and engineer Galileo, who questioned the Catholic Church's view about the sun and the earth, holding the opinion that the sun is motionless at the center of the universe and that the earth is not at its center but moves around the sun. Secrets in the archive. Shh! Undoubtedly, the secretive nature of the Catholic Church and its silence on most matters related to its secret archive have fueled decades of speculation about what may be contained inside. Consequently, the contents of the Vatican Secret Archive have been, in many ways, a godsend for conspiracy theorists. A number of these theories revolve around Jesus Christ and whether he may have been married and even have had children. Some conspiracy theorists believe the archives contain evidence for the existence of his biological descendants. Perhaps the most well-known cover-up story regarding the Vatican archive relates to the text of the highly controversial Third Secret of Fatima. In May and October 1917, 3 Portuguese shepherd children witnessed visions of the Virgin Mary and received ominous and puzzling prophecies from her. One of these visions was witnessed by thousands of people. One of the children, Lucia Santos, kept the third secret to herself for decades before revealing it to the Vatican in the 1940s. Some believe that hidden in the Vatican archives are documents related to the third message, which they believe may be connected with anything from an imminent nuclear holocaust and natural disasters leading to the apocalypse to deep divisions within the Catholic Church and even rival popes. The Vatican supposedly made this secret public in 2000, where it explained that it was related to a vision of the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. But for a number of researchers, this revelation by the Vatican was not enough, and they accused the Holy See of covering up an alleged, as yet unrevealed, second text of the Third Secret. This has since become known as the Fourth Secret of Fatima. Indeed, in 2009, a book by that title was published by the Italian media personality and journalist Antonio Socci. One advertisement for Socci's book speculated on the Vatican that may be still hiding its archive. It said, on June 26, 2000, Vatican officials, including Cardinal Bertone, released what they claim was the Third Secret of Fatima. They further said that it was predicted of the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II in 1981. Antonio Socci, an acclaimed Italian journalist and television personality, originally sided with the Vatican's interpretation of the Third Secret. Upon closer investigation of this matter, the evidence led him to the conclusion that there is another document of the Third Secret containing the actual words of Our Lady. So far, the Vatican is still hiding this text while claiming that it has all been released. The Vatican Time Machine. Perhaps the most bizarre conspiracy theory pertaining to the secret archive is that it contains a time machine known as the chronovisor. This machine was apparently built by a Benedictine monk named Father Pellegrino Ernetti, which he claimed was used to observe the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. A 2002 book by French theologist Father François Brun states that the chronovisor was developed by Father Pellegrino Ernetti, who kept it secret until the early 1960s when he confided in Brun. Pellegrino told Brun that a dozen scientists, including physicist Enrico Fermi and former Nazi scientist Werner von Braun, had helped him to build it. The mysterious device apparently consisted of numerous antennae, 3 composed of unknown metals, which received light and sound signals on every wavelength, a direction finder for tuning in to a particular time and place, a screen, and a recording device. The chronovisor supposedly allowed the team of scientists to observe and record events of the past, including the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The time machine could therefore validate the teachings of the Bible by providing a direct look into the past. Ernetti claimed that he had witnessed firsthand the founding of the Roman Empire, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Romans crucifying Jesus Christ, and the Last Supper. He even said he kept a photograph of the latter biblical event for himself as a souvenir. In May 1972, the Italian magazine published an image obtained using the chronovisor of the crucified Christ. Ernetti believed this was proof to the world of the reality of the time machine. However, skeptics believe that the supposed photograph of Christ was made from an image of a postcard made in the Italian town of Colli Valenza. However, some researchers believe that the chronovisor still exists in working condition and is actually used to travel in time by the Vatican or perhaps some other secret organization. Right up until his death in 1994, Ernetti maintained that the machine was real and had been hidden away by the Vatican in order to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. Just before he died, Ernetti wrote an open letter stating that the device was real and claimed that Pope Pius XII forbade him to disclose any details about this device because the machine was very dangerous. It can restrain the freedom of man. Encode-each ratio. In the last decade or so, the Vatican has been digitizing its archive, and in 2018, the archives had digitized more than 7 million images. However, only a small fraction of this material is accessible online. In 2017, a project called Encode-each ratio began in Roma Tre University, and it was believed that the secrets of the Vatican archive may be made public for the first time. This project used artificial intelligence, AI, and optical character recognition, OCR software to search and transcribe the neglected texts in the Vatican archive and hopefully make the results available for the very first time. Almost immediately, however, the team ran into difficulties. They found that although the software worked well on typeset text, it was far less effective on handwritten documents, unfortunately, as the vast majority of old Vatican documents are. However, like all artificial intelligence, the software will improve over time as it works on more text, and the research team are confident they will soon overcome any problems and the mysteries of the archive will be revealed. Nowadays, the secrecy surrounding the Vatican archive appears to have lifted. Any scholar, historian or journalist with verified credentials can obtain access to the archive as long as they make an appointment in advance, get approved by the Vatican, and follow the rules for handling the manuscripts. Not all documents are available to scholars, however, because according to the Vatican, they're still being indexed. The magical Trieste of Solomon and the Key of Solomon are two grimoires, magic handbooks, commonly said to have been written by the biblical King Solomon. The latter grimoire has been described as the most enduring, influential and notorious Solomonic book, and much has been written about it. English translations of the Key of Solomon can be found easily. By contrast, the magical Trieste of Solomon is not as well known and much less has been written about it. Nevertheless, this grimoire is regarded as the precursor to the Key of Solomon. The magical treatise of Solomon is also known as the Little Key of the whole art of hygromancy, found by several craftsmen and the holy prophet Solomon, or simply as the Hygromantia. This text is a combination of Greek manuscripts and dates to the 15th century AD. This text is the ancestor of the famous Key of Solomon. It is said that the magical treatise of Solomon was taken to Italy, likely Venice, at some point of time during the decline of the Byzantine Empire. Some say that the Key of Solomon was a translation of the magical treatise of Solomon from Latin to Italian. The Latin name of this text, by the way, is Clavicula Salomonis. Legends say that the grimoire was originally written by Solomon for his son, who was told to hide the book in the king's tomb. The website Got Questions explains that the book was supposedly found by a Babylonian philosopher at a later date, who had a vision of an angel who told the philosopher to hide it from the unworthy, which the philosopher saw as encouragement to cast a spell on the book. As an interesting side note, the Key of Solomon was brought back into popular culture in 2009 when it was referenced in the Dan Brown novel The Lost Symbol. In Mather's edition of the Key of Solomon, the grimoire is divided into two parts. Both parts deal with various aspects of the practice of magic. For example, several chapters are dedicated to the preparations needed to be undertaken by a practitioner of magic. To give you an idea of what the text is like, Mather's edition of Book 2, Chapter 5 begins. The bath is necessary for all magical and necromantic arts. Wherefore, if thou wishest to perform any experiment or operation, having arranged all things necessary thereunto, according to the proper days and hours, thou shalt go unto a river or running stream, or thou shalt have warm water ready in some large vessel or tub in thy secret cabinet, and while disrobing thyself of thy raiment, thou shalt repeat the following psalm. In order to illustrate the range of magical aspects dealt in the Key of Solomon, a few more examples will be used. Chapter 10 of the book is entitled Of the Experiment of Invisibility and How It Should Be Performed. This is followed by a completely unrelated chapter entitled To Hinder a Sportsman from Killing Any Game. Solomon is perhaps best known for the power given to him by God to communicate and control supernatural beings, and there are some chapters relating to this as well. For instance, in Chapter 13 of Book 1, one may learn how to make the magic carpet proper for interrogating the intelligences, so as to obtain an answer regarding whatsoever matter one may wish to learn, followed by a chapter on how to render thyself master of a treasure possessed by the spirits. Whether the texts are really written by Solomon, or even if they weren't, there's certainly some interesting topics covered within. The Seal of Solomon, known as the Ring of Solomon, is believed to be a signet ring that belongs to King Solomon of Israel. The king is thought by some to have magical powers, and it originates in Jewish tradition. Nevertheless, the Seal of Solomon can also be found in later Islamic and Western occultism, as both of these adopted it from Jewish tradition. As a symbol, the Seal of Solomon is still in use today, and one of its simple depictions is either as a pentagram or a hexagram, the latter being similar to the Star of David. One source in which the Seal of Solomon is mentioned is in the Testament of Solomon. This is a treatise on the forms and activities of demons and the charms effective against them. It has been claimed that this text was written by Solomon himself and provides accounts of certain experiences that the king had during the building of the temple. Around the beginning of the Testament, the author provides a story to explain how Solomon received his seal from God. In this story, Solomon notices that the young son of his master workman was growing thinner each day, despite being given double wages and a double supply of food. When the child was questioned, he told the king that a demon had been harassing him every day after sunset. "I pray thee, O king, listen, what has befallen all that thy child hath. After sunset, when I lie down to rest, one of the evil demons comes and takes away from me 1/2 of my pay and 1/2 of my food. Then he also takes hold of my right hand and sucks my thumb. And lo, my soul is oppressed, and so my body waxes thinner every day." Solomon then prayed to God for help, who answered the king's prayers by sending him a magic signet ring which had an engraving of a pentagram on its seal. "And it came about through my prayer that grace was given to me by the Lord Sabaoth, by Michael his archangel. He brought me a little ring having a seal consisting of an engraved stone, and said to me, Take, O Solomon, king son of David, the gift which the Lord God hath sent thee, the highest Sabaoth. With it thou shalt lock up all demons of the earth, male and female, and with their help thou shalt build up Jerusalem. But thou must wear the seal of God, and this engraving of the seal of the ring sent to thee is pentalpha." Using this ring, Solomon began to bring demons under his control, beginning with Orneus, the demon who'd been tormenting the son of Solomon's master workman. By questioning the demons whom he summoned, Solomon was able to learn their names, how they persecuted human beings, and how they could be countered. Additionally, the king was also to make these demons work for him. For example, Solomon commanded the demon Asmodeus to help with the construction of the temple. "As the Lord God of my fathers liveth, I will lay iron on thee to wear. But thou shalt also make the clay for the entire construction of the temple, treading it down with thy feet." Once the construction of the temple was finished, Solomon had the demons imprisoned in bottles. These bottles were said to have been buried under the monument of the demons helped build. In one story, the demons were released when Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem. When the temple was destroyed, the Babylonians found the bottles buried by Solomon. Thinking that they contained gold, the soldiers opened the bottles, thus releasing the demons back into the world. Another story, found in the famous 1001 Nights, tells of a fisherman who found one of Solomon's trapped demons, referred to as a genie in the tale. This was a small copper vessel which had a leaden seal on it. The seal, which is the seal of Solomon, is described as having the great name of God engraved on it. Apart from such purported mystical qualities, the Seal of Solomon possesses symbolic values as well. For example, the base of the seal is shown to touch the ground whilst its tip reaches the heavens, thus symbolizing a harmony of opposites. An example of this harmony can be seen in the statement that the Seal of Solomon symbolizes the link between science, beauty, and metaphysics, with elements of medicine and magic, astronomy, and astrology. One of the outstanding geniuses of the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, is as famous for his science as he is for his painting. Even in his own time, he was renowned in the fields of mathematics, geometry, optics, physics, chemistry, civil and mechanical engineering, pyrotechnics, and zoology. As an engineer, he had ideas far ahead of his time, inventing the helicopter, solar power, a calculator, the armored tank, and even developing a theory of plate tectonics. It's thought that, rather like Nikola Tesla, he may have been in touch with, or influenced by, extraterrestrials aiming to accelerate our speed of technical and civil advancement. He was a cryptologist, and that's why many researchers think that he may have left secret knowledge hidden within his work, which, when deciphered, may provide the keys to unlock the universe. Vinci, a town in northern Italy, was his birthplace. He took his name as, being illegitimate, he wasn't allowed to use his father's name, just the place of where he was born. As a teenager, Leonardo moved to nearby Florence, which at the time was the center of a cultural revolution known as the Renaissance, when new ideas, both scientific and cultural, exploded onto the scene. The zeitgeist infused and seeded the mind of young Leonardo, who, largely self-taught, found himself master of so many new and exciting disciplines. Though he was widely admired by many of his contemporaries, the most powerful political force throughout much of the world had their doubts about him: the medieval Roman Catholic Church. The trigger for the Renaissance was the rediscovery of ancient classical writings that had been stored, unnoticed, in monasteries following the dissolution of the Roman Empire. For almost the first time, Europeans could study the works of Aristotle, Plato, and the other great philosophers. Unfortunately, many of their ideas did not sit well with Christianity. Although Da Vinci was a Christian, he openly admitted to being interested in a wide range of spiritual philosophies and their secret knowledge. Let's look closely at one of his paintings, actually very closely, using a specialized infrared camera developed by Dr. Maurizio Saracini, graduate of the University of California, San Diego. And what he found under the surface of the Adoration of the Magi was as revealing as it was surprising. The Adoration of the Magi, painted around 1481, shows the three wise men visiting the baby Jesus in Bethlehem. Like traveling back in a time machine, the camera revealed Leonardo's creation layer by layer. But he wasn't ready for the heretical image that came to view, a scene showing a pagan temple rising from the ruins of a Christian church. Total heresy. Little wonder that Leonardo painted over it. Elsewhere, Dr. Saracini found a scattering of figures, cavalry horses and classical architecture set in a rural scene. And at the top left of the painting, Saracini uncovered two people in great distress, sitting on the stairs of a ruined temple. But on closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't a temple in ruins. It was actually an Egyptian temple being built, showing the techniques being used. And tellingly, the top of the temple's columns was capped by a lotus flower, which to ancient Egyptians represented the flower of life. The flower of life tells the entire story of how the universe was created using sacred geometry. The idea of sacred geometry comes from the belief that a god used a geometric plan to create the universe. Such thoughts have ancient origins. Plato said, "God geometrizes continually." Leonardo da Vinci was completely obsessed with sacred geometry. He even compiled the sacred geometry principles of the human body in the famous and influential drawing known as the Vitruvian Man. His hidden symbol of the flower of life in the Adoration of the Magi may indicate that he had tapped into this source of the ultimate cosmic knowledge. But something quite strange happened that seemed to accelerate his genius. He disappeared completely for 2 years, between the ages of 24 and 26. Fortunately, he wrote about it in his journal. He'd gone off hiking in the nearby countryside and had found a cave. As he stood before it, he felt a strange power drawing him inside. Curious, he did not resist it, and on entering the cave, he felt transformed. It's conceivable that, through the influence of his understanding of the flower of life, he found himself communicating with the originators or controllers of the universe, extraterrestrial teachers, who influenced him and opened his eyes to the workings of the universe and a glimpse into the future. And from that time onwards, he no longer had to measure ratios or proportions. It just came to him spontaneously, tapping into something that brought knowledge and information in the same way that the ancient cultures received theirs. It's obvious that his experience in the cave had had a profound effect upon him, and in the painting, The Virgin on the Rocks, the setting is unprecedented. The Virgin Mary, the angel Uriel, and the babies Jesus and John the Baptist are all set against a background of rock formations and, in the distance, mountains and water. In this cave-like painting, was he pointing to revelations that he'd witnessed during his missing years? And was his use of the painting technique, sfumato, an indication of some kind of portal? Sfumato creates a hazy, out-of-focus plane that Leonardo described as without lines or borders, in the manner of smoke or beyond the focus plane. The depiction of the archangel Uriel is unusual. The story is that both Jesus and John had to escape King Herod's order. Jesus, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt, and according to the apocryphal story, the angel brought John the Baptist to accompany them. However, the source of this story comes from the apocryphal Gospel of John the Baptist, where the angel is identified as Gabriel, not Uriel. Why did Leonardo change this? Uriel was the archangel of wisdom, a celestial being from the heavens who was thought to be the guardian of secret knowledge. And notice that in the painting, he's pointing his index finger at Jesus. The pointed finger is a symbol widely used in alchemy. It represents someone's relationship with the spiritual world, and specifically an indication of a spiritual path. The symbolism isn't Christian, it's profoundly pagan. Perhaps it was Uriel, in the form of an extraterrestrial, whom Leonardo met in the cave, continuing the angel's mission of bringing enlightenment to humanity. Along with the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci's most iconic painting is, of course, The Last Supper, depicting the moment when Jesus informed his disciples that one of them would betray him. It also marked the inception of the Eucharist, the sharing of Jesus' blood and body. It's a most unusual painting. It's almost as if someone has pressed the pause button. All the disciples are in various states of shock, except for one, the character, usually thought of as John the Apostle, to Jesus' immediate right. He's leaning away from Jesus with his eyes closed, almost without emotion. The face is unusually white and the hair is long, and the clothes are not the traditional rough ones of John the Baptist. He eschewed soft or elegant clothing. His face is notably feminine. And that's why many scholars have raised the possibility that he is actually a she. An absurd suggestion? Far from it. In his treatise on painting, Leonardo wrote that a woman should always be depicted, quote, their heads looking downwards and leaning a little to one side. And that's exactly what this character is doing. And the woman, with Jesus, forms a huge M shape, presumably a clue to the name Mary, Mary Magdalene. And notice that both of them are wearing similar clothes in exactly the same manner. In the New Testament, Mary is described as a follower of Jesus. It would be very unusual for a 30-year-old Jewish man at that time not to have a wife, and it's presumed that Mary Magdalene was indeed his wife. But to marry Jesus was contrary to Catholic doctrine, and they cast her as a prostitute, even though there is no textual or historical basis for this. Even though it's assumed that the painting is not just about the betrayal, but also about the Eucharist, where is the chalice containing wine, the symbolic blood of Christ? To many biblical scholars, the chalice, known as the Holy Grail, was Mary Magdalene herself. So it is there. The Grail is her womb. For, if apocryphal story, Jesus, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt, and according to the apocryphal story, the angel brought John the Baptist to accompany them. However, the source of this story comes from the apocryphal Gospel of John the Baptist, where the angel is identified as Gabriel, not Uriel. Why did Leonardo change this? Uriel was the archangel of wisdom, a celestial being from the heavens who was thought to be the guardian of secret knowledge. And notice that in the painting, he's pointing his index finger at Jesus. The pointed finger is a symbol widely used in alchemy. It represents someone's relationship with the spiritual world, and specifically an indication of a spiritual path. The symbolism isn't Christian, it's profoundly pagan. Perhaps it was Uriel, in the form of an extraterrestrial, whom Leonardo met in the cave, continuing the angel's mission of bringing enlightenment to humanity. Along with the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci's most iconic painting is, of course, The Last Supper, depicting the moment when Jesus informed his disciples that one of them would betray him. It also marked the inception of the Eucharist, the sharing of Jesus' blood and body. It's a most unusual painting. It's almost as if someone has pressed the pause button. All the disciples are in various states of shock, except for one, the character, usually thought of as John the Apostle, to Jesus' immediate right. He's leaning away from Jesus with his eyes closed, almost without emotion. The face is unusually white and the hair is long, and the clothes are not the traditional rough ones of John the Baptist. He eschewed soft or elegant clothing. His face is notably feminine. And that's why many scholars have raised the possibility that he is actually a she. An absurd suggestion? Far from it. In his treatise on painting, Leonardo wrote that a woman should always be depicted, quote, their heads looking downwards and leaning a little to one side. And that's exactly what this character is doing. And the woman, with Jesus, forms a huge M shape, presumably a clue to the name Mary, Mary Magdalene. And notice that both of them are wearing similar clothes in exactly the same manner. In the New Testament, Mary is described as a follower of Jesus. It would be very unusual for a 30-year-old Jewish man at that time not to have a wife, and it's presumed that Mary Magdalene was indeed his wife. But to marry Jesus was contrary to Catholic doctrine, and they cast her as a prostitute, even though there is no textual or historical basis for this. Even though it's assumed that the painting is not just about the betrayal, but also about the Eucharist, where is the chalice containing wine, the symbolic blood of Christ? To many biblical scholars, the chalice, known as the Holy Grail, was Mary Magdalene herself. So it is there. The Grail is her womb. For, if apocryphal stories are taken seriously, she and Jesus had a number of children. And, through the effect of her being the Holy Grail, these children would be special, carrying a new type of DNA to bring about a new and enlightened human race. Two Italian scholars have delved deeper into the obscure symbolism of the Last Supper. Musician and scholar Giovanni Maria Palla has found evidence of musical notation in the painting. Leonardo was an exceptional musician, serving the Medici as a singer and lyre player for many years. The tablecloth has vertical and horizontal lines in the form of a musical score. Several of the items on the table are unusually heightened, loaves of bread in particular. These, Palla suggests, are notes on the score. As famed astronomer Carl Sagan said, if they were to ask me what to send to establish communication with civilizations beyond our solar system, I'd send them music. And of course, that's what he did in NASA's Voyager program of 1977, when he sent a gold disc of music, sounds, and images far into space. We've already seen that Leonardo was an adept at sacred geometry. Like geometry, music is, at its heart, a mathematical enterprise, and much can be hidden in its patterns. The Vatican researcher Sabrina Sforza Galizia claims to have found a mathematical and astrological puzzle in the painting. She found the meaning in the central half-moon window above Christ, which after deciphering suggests that there will be a universal flood that will swamp the earth in the year 4006, between March the 21st and November the 1st. And looking through Leonardo's documents, this Italian art expert has said that he believed that this would mark, quote, a new start for humanity. Leonardo's Salvator Mundi is not only the world's most expensive piece of art, but also its most mysterious. Apart from the hypnotic and far-seeing eyes, the most extraordinary aspect of this painting is the crystal sphere in Jesus' left hand. This is the Sintamani stone, the wishful fulfilling crystal sphere of Tibetan Buddhism, the jewel that grants wishes. It's seen clearly in images of the Buddhist deity, Kishti Gaba, and it's usually seen in the possession of a bodhisattva, or enlightened teacher. Two questions come to mind. How would a 15th century Roman Catholic artist have known about a magical 10th century Buddhist symbol? And why would Leonardo put it in a profoundly Christian painting? The answer to this latter question may come from, according to researchers, due to the extremely strict nature of the church authorities of the time, Michelangelo, one of history's greatest artists, hid secret messages in his most famous work. In a panel named Separation of Light from Darkness, two neuroscientists believe that they have discovered a hidden sketch of the human brain. Other researchers have discovered depictions of optic nerves, brain stems, kidneys and other organs in the images in the Sistine Chapel. But what was Michelangelo trying to say by including these hidden images in his great work? Michelangelo was born on the 6th of March, 1475 in Capri, Florence, Italy. He was a Renaissance sculptor, painter, architect and poet whose influence on the development of Western art is profound. Many of his works in painting, sculpture and architecture are among the most famous art in existence. Michelangelo thought of himself mainly as a sculptor, and indeed he worked in marble sculpture all his life, whilst he worked in other arts only during certain periods. Michelangelo was considered the greatest living artist during his own lifetime, one effect of which is that his career was more fully documented than that of any other artist of the time or earlier. In fact, he was the first Western artist who had biographies published about him while he was still alive. Perhaps Michelangelo's greatest achievement, and also the best known, are his frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. The Sistine Chapel is a papal chapel in the Vatican Palace that was erected in 1473–81 by the architect Giovanni de' Dolci for Pope Sixtus IV, from whom it gets its name. The chapel already contained distinguished wall paintings by various well-known artists when Michelangelo was asked to add works for the comparatively unimportant ceiling when he was 33 years old. Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling are collectively known as the Sistine ceiling and were commissioned by Pope Julius II in 1508 and were painted by him from 1508 to 1512. Measuring 12,000 square feet, the spectacular work includes 9 scenes from the Old Testament and more than 300 lifelike figures. From 1534 to 1541, Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment fresco on the west wall for Pope Paul III. These two gigantic frescoes are now considered among the greatest achievements of Western painting. The panel, The Creation of Adam, where God and Adam's fingers almost touch, is one of the most recognizable and copied works of art in history. One lesser-known fact is that Michelangelo was also an anatomist. At the age of 17, he had begun his career by dissecting corpses from the church graveyard, but the great artist concealed this interest from the public by destroying the majority of his anatomical sketches and notes. But researchers now believe he used some of these sketches in his paintings on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, cunningly hidden from the eyes of Pope Julius II, religious worshippers, historians, and art lovers for 5 centuries. In 1990, physician Franklin Messberger discovered something strange in the creation of Adam. It was, he thought, a brain hidden in the figure of God where the robes of the angels at his side intertwine. Messberger published his findings in the Journal of the American Medical Association, concluding that the depiction in God creating Adam in the central panel on the Sistine Chapel ceiling was a textbook anatomical illustration of the human brain in cross-section. Messberger also speculated that Michelangelo surrounded God with a shroud representing the human brain because he wanted to suggest that God was bestowing not only life on Adam, but also supreme human intelligence. But this was by far from being the end of the research into Michelangelo's hidden messages. Ian Sook and Raphael Tamago, experts in neuroanatomy at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in Baltimore, made further claims about hidden images in Michelangelo's paintings. They concluded in the study that in the depiction of God, in separation of light from darkness, there is evidence that Michelangelo had included concealed images of a brainstem and a spinal cord. In the separation of light from darkness, Dr. Tamago discovered lines and shapes which were different from the normal external anatomy of the neck, anomalies that he believes cannot be accidental. He said, "The anatomy of the neck is very, very unusual, and if we were not intentionally drawn that way, you would have to postulate that Michelangelo had a very bad day, which is very unlikely because he was very meticulous. Michelangelo definitely knew how to depict necks. He knew anatomy so well. That's why it was such a mystery why this particular neck looked so odd." But not everyone agrees that Michelangelo left secret messages in his Sistine Chapel paintings. Joanna Woods Marsden, a professor of art history at the University of California, Los Angeles, was shocked by the author's theories. She said, "My initial reaction on looking at the illustrations is that this is complete nonsense, to put it politely. to draw arbitrary lines all over Renaissance paintings and expect to be taken seriously by the scholarly community. Brian A. Curran, an associate professor of art history at Pennsylvania State University, shared this opinion, but was somewhat milder in his criticism, saying, "I think this may be another case of the authors looking too hard for something they want to find. I don't want to discourage people from looking, but sometimes a neck is just a neck." But the subject of Michelangelo's hidden images was far from closed. One example is a ram's skull that resembles a uterus, appears 8 times throughout the painting. Dr. Divis de Campos, researcher in human anatomy at the Federal University of Health Sciences of Porto Alegre in Brazil, was the lead author of the article. He concluded that the allusions to the female reproductive system in the artwork are a concealed attack on Catholic misogyny, and that Michelangelo believed Christianity could learn a lot from the more matriarchal traditions of Judaism and the pagan world. In April 2008, a book called The Sistine Secrets, Michelangelo's Forbidden Messages in the Heart of the Vatican, by Rabbi Benjamin Blech and Roy Dolinaire appeared. This work claimed to be a revelation of coded anti-Pope and anti-Rome messages embedded in the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. But this time the messages were not in the form of anatomical drawings. The authors discovered signs in the works of Michelangelo that suggest the Renaissance master painter had studied Jewish wisdom literature such as the Kabbalah and hidden religious symbols in his paintings. In the preface to the book, the authors state, "Unknown to most viewers is the dramatic truth that these frescoes contain a lost mystical message of universal love, dangerously contrary to church doctrine in Michelangelo's day. But true to the original teachings of the Bible, as well as to much of contemporary liberal Christian thought. Driven by the truths he had come to recognize during his years of study in private non-traditional schooling in Florence, truths rooted in his involvement with Judaic texts as well as Kabbalistic training that conflicted with approved Christian doctrine. Michelangelo needed to find a way to let viewers discern what he truly believed. He couldn't allow the church to forever silence his soul. And what the church would permit him to communicate openly, he ingeniously found a way to convey to those diligent enough to learn his secret language. In July 1648, during the final stages of the 30-year conflict, the Swedish army looted the city of Prague. Among the treasures they stole and brought with them when they returned home was a bizarre book called the Codex Gigas. Codex Gigas meaning giant book. Not only is Codex Gigas famous for being the largest medieval book in the world, but because of its contents, it is also known as the Devil's Bible. Does this mean that the book was written by the devil himself? The origin of this antiquated Goliath book is obscure at best. It has, by many, been compared with the 7 wonders of the world in the Middle Ages. For more than 700 years, this fascinating book has hypnotized researchers the world over. The Gigas Codex is associated with a specific legend that ought to have worried the church. But in fact, this ancient manuscript was never condemned by them. The fact that the church would allow a Bible that depicts the devil sounds like a contradiction, but in this case, it is actually true. Originally, the Devil's Bible was brought to Prague from Bromov Monastery in 1594, where it had been kept since the year 1420. King Rudolf II, who reigned from 1576 to 1612, had asked to borrow the Devil's Bible. He promised the monks that when he was finished with the book, he would return it, which of course he never did. The Codex Gigas has remained in Sweden ever since it was taken from the Czech Republic. On only 2 occasions it was exhibited abroad, once in New York and once in Berlin. On September the 24th, 2007, after 350 years, the Swedes also offered authorization to put the manuscript on display in Prague. Conditions for showing the Codex were strict, and the state needed to insure the Bible for the incredible sum of $15.1 million. The Codex Gigas is the largest known medieval illuminated manuscript in the world, at a length of 92 centimeters. It was also known as the Devil's Bible because of a very unusual full-page portrait of the devil and the legend surrounding its creation. Allegedly, it was created in the 13th century in the Benedictine monastery of Podlajice in Bohemia, which is a region of the modern-day Czech Republic. The Codex Gigas includes the entire Latin Bible, as well as many other writings of the time, also in Latin, including further religious writings, reference books, and medical texts. It seems to be an early encyclopedia, an attempt to collect all the world's knowledge between two covers. The Codex allegedly contains a magic formula on how to overcome evil, misfortune, and disease. Very large illuminated Bibles were a common feature of Romanesque monastic book production, but even within this group, the page size of the Codex Gigas is exceptional. Who would create such a book? According to one version of a legend that was already recorded in the Middle Ages, the scribe was a monk who broke his monastic vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive. In order to avoid this harsh penalty, he promised to create in one night a book to glorify the monastery forever, including all human knowledge. Near midnight, he became sure that he could not complete this task alone, so he made a special prayer, not addressed to God, but to the fallen angel Lucifer, asking him to help him finish the book in exchange for his soul. The devil completed the manuscript, and the monk added the devil's picture out of gratitude for his aid. In tests to create the work, it's estimated that reproducing only the calligraphy without the illustrations or embellishments would have taken 5 years of non-stop writing. The Codex amazing book binding is comprised of wooden boards covered in leather, with ornate metal guards and fittings. At 92 centimeters long, 50 centimeters wide, and 22 centimeters thick, it is the largest known medieval manuscript. Weighing 74.8 kilograms, Codex Gigas is composed of 310 leaves of vellum claimed to be made from leather, covering 142 square meters in total. It initially contained 320 sheets, though some of these were subsequently removed. It is unknown who removed the pages or for what purpose, but it seems likely that they contained the monastic rules of the Benedictines. However, in recent times, the missing pages have been portrayed as having been deliberately removed and containing an apocalyptic text known as the Devil's Prayer. From 1649 to 2007, the manuscript was kept in the Swedish Royal Library in Stockholm. The site of its creation is marked by a maquette in the town museum of Krust. On Friday the 7th of May, 1697, a ferocious fire broke out at the royal castle in Stockholm, and the Royal Library suffered very badly. The Codex was rescued from the flames by being thrown out of a window. This damaged the binding and knocked loose some pages which are still missing. According to the vicar Johan Erikssons, the Codex landed on and injured a bystander. In September 2007, after 359 years, the Codex Gigas returned to Prague on loan from Sweden until January 2008 and was on display at the Czech National Library. With the exception of the portraits of the devil, an author portrait of Josephus, and a squirrel perched on top of an initial, there are also 2 images representing heaven and earth during the creation, as blue and green circles with respectively the sun and moon and some stars, and a planet all of sea with no landmasses. Folio 290 recto, otherwise empty, includes a picture of the devil, about 50 centimeters tall. Directly opposite the devil is a full-page depiction of the kingdom of heaven, thus juxtaposing contrasting images of good and evil. The devil is shown quite prominently, crouching with his arms positioned in a posture creating a menacing effect, as if at any moment he could leap to trap a new victim in his claws. His size is scary in itself because he alone fills the entire space of hell. Even though he does not reach up to the tops of the towers, he is naked except for a white loincloth covered all over in small comma-shaped red dashes, which have been interpreted as the tails of ermine furs, the distinguishing attribute of a sovereign entity. Strangely for depictions of the devil, he has no tail, and his body, arms and legs are of normal human proportions. However, his hands and feet display only 4 fingers and toes each, terminating in large sharp claws, which are bestial, as are his huge horns, which, like all his claws, are red as though dipped in blood. His open mouth reveals his small white teeth, and 2 long red tongues protrude from the corners of his mouth, as if reinforcing his association with the serpent. This doubling of tongues is deliberate, of course. It evokes negative associations with serpents, which have forked tongues, a metaphoric reference to dishonest human beings. The expression forked tongues is an ancient one and is found in the Bible. The reason for the variation in colouring is that the pages of the Codex are of vellum. Vellum, or scraped and dried animal hide, tans when exposed to ultraviolet light. Over centuries, the pages that were most frequently turned have developed this telltale darker colour. The Codex has a unified look, as the nature of the writing is unchanged throughout, showing no signs of age, disease, or mood on the part of the scribe. This may have led to the belief that the whole book was written in a very short time, but scientists are starting to investigate the theory that it took over 20 years to complete. The length, size, and detail of the Codex are of such extraordinary magnitude that legend surrounds its origin, as mentioned earlier, specifically the story that it was written by one scribe in one night with the help from the devil himself. According to legend, the Codex was created by Herman the Recluse in the Benedictine monastery of Podjatsa near Krumien, the Czech Republic. The monastery was destroyed sometime in the 15th century during the Hussite Revolution. Records in the Codex end in the year 1229. The official Codex Gigas resides in the National Library of Sweden. However, it contains a digitized version of every page of the manuscript, as well as commentaries on its history, text, script, initials, and decoration. The original manuscript is kept in a climate-controlled storeroom and is not on display for the general public.
Since the late 1800s, scientists have been baffled by mysterious pieces of stone found buried in India and Pakistan. Belonging to the Indus Valley civilization, one of the oldest Indian civilizations known to have existed, these small stones are carved with a line of symbols over a depiction of an animal. This mysterious script was in use at a number of sites, including one of the Indus Valley civilization's major urban centres, Mohenjo-daro. The stones represent one of the oldest uncracked codes ever discovered, but recently complex statistical techniques and cognitive science have been brought in, and researchers now believe they are finally close to cracking the code. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, is the earliest known urban culture of the Indian subcontinent. It originated around 3300 BC in the Indus and Ghaggar-Hakra river valleys in what is now Pakistan and western India. Around 1,000 towns and settlement sites of the Indus civilization have so far been discovered, with the main sites being the cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, located 400 miles north of Mohenjo-daro, and the coastal site of Lothal. Traces of the Indus civilization have been discovered as far north as the Himalayas and northern Afghanistan, and as far south as Mumbai in Maharashtra state, India. During its peak between 2600 and 1900 BC, it's been estimated that the Indus civilization may have had a population of as many as 5 million people. The remains of one of the world's first great cities, Mohenjo-daro, lie on the bank of the Indus River in the Sindh province of southern Pakistan. Surrounded by a fertile floodplain, Mohenjo-daro must have been an extremely prosperous city, controlling the trade routes based on the river network. The site of Mohenjo-daro was first occupied around 3500 BC, but was at its peak during the time of the Indus civilization, 2600 to 1900 BC. The city covers an area of over 250 hectares, and as with all the Indus Valley sites, was laid out on a grid pattern plan, with both wide and narrow parallel streets intersecting one another, to divide the city into a grid filled with compact blocks of houses. Most Indus Valley towns also used the same size bricks and a standardized system of weights in the form of carefully worked colored cubes of stone. The majority of the buildings at Mohenjo-daro and other Indus sites are made of baked bricks, which give greater durability than mud brick construction, and is one of the reasons why so much survives at the sites today. Signs of change at Mohenjo-daro began to appear after 1900 BC in the form of a new kind of pottery called jukar, and seals inscribed with geometric designs rather than Indus writing. It's been suggested that contorted skeletons found scattered in the streets of Mohenjo-daro indicate that the city came to a violent end, perhaps at the hands of Aryan invaders from the north. For the excavator of the site, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, these remains brought to mind verses from the Rig Veda, an ancient Indian collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns dedicated to the gods, some verses from which tell of the destruction of cities by the terrible warlike god Indra. Wheeler stated his opinion of the skeletons at Mohenjo-daro in dramatic fashion. Men, women and children were massacred in the streets and houses, and were left lying there or at the best crudely covered without last rites. However, no weapons or signs of such an attack have ever been found at the site, and the 37 skeletons discovered were found in the lower town, the residential area of the settlement, rather than the fortified citadel. Despite this evidence, some bizarre claims have been made surrounding the supposed destruction of Mohenjo-daro. Without doubt, the most extreme theory is that Mohenjo-daro and other cities of the Indus civilization were destroyed by ancient atomic warfare. Cited as evidence for this are the facts that the skeletons found at the ancient city were highly radioactive, comparable with those from Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and that many of these skeletons were sprawled in the street, some holding hands as if some instant horrible doom had taken place. The supposed discovery of a heavy layer of radioactive ash in Rajasthan, India, which covers a 3 square mile area, is also given in support of the claim of ancient atomic warfare. One unsolved mystery surrounding Mohenjo-daro and the Indus civilization is its undeciphered language. In fact, we don't even know the original names of the cities of the Indus Valley. Mohenjo-daro, for example, is Sind for Mound of the Dead. The Indus script, used between 2600 to 1900 BC, consists of short texts written from right to left on flat stone tablets known as seals, and on pottery, copper tablets, bronze implements, and ivory and bone rods. Although there are around 4,000 objects described with the Indus script, the texts are brief, the longest is only 26 characters, and there are numerous duplicate inscriptions. Indeed, with an average of just 4 or 5 signs, the shortness of most inscriptions makes decipherment all the more difficult. Sometimes the unidentified characters are accompanied by engravings of animals, elephants, tigers, rhinoceroses, and occasionally by anthropomorphic figures, which some scholars have identified with early versions of the Hindu deities first described 2,000 years later in Sanskrit texts. Several thousand Indus inscribed texts have been discovered so far, mostly from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, but also in the more distant lands of trading partners along the Persian Gulf and in Mesopotamia. There have been various claims to have deciphered the Indus script, but the general opinion of scholars is that until a bilingual inscription is found, like the ancient Egyptian Rosetta Stone, it's unlikely that we'll discover the language of the inhabitants of Mohenjo-daro and the Indus Valley. Nisha Yadav, a researcher in the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, India, highlights the difficulties in decoding the script. The first one is that the texts are really short. An average artifact only has 5 symbols. The longest example excavated so far has 17. Such short texts make uncovering the writing's structure difficult. This is, of course, complicated by the fact that we don't know what the underlying language is. However, there may be some linguistic light at the end of the tunnel. It was recently announced on various news outlets that scientists believe they were close to solving the mystery of the Indus Valley script. Utilizing complex statistical techniques and cognitive science, researchers into the elusive script are finally getting closer to cracking the code. Rajesh Rao is director of the National Science Foundation's Center for Sensory Motor Neural Engineering and a professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department at the University of Washington. A few years ago, Rao published a study that examined the sequential structure of the Indus script. Rao explained that what we were interested in was if we could deduce some statistical regularities or structure, basically ruling out that these symbols were just juxtapositions of symbols and that there were actually some rules or patterns. In the end, Rao and his team found that the mysterious Indus script was in fact likely to represent a language. It's not proof that the symbols are encoding a language, but it's additional evidence hinting that these symbols are not just random juxtapositions of arbitrary symbols, and they follow patterns that are consistent with those you would expect to find if the symbols are encoding language. Since the publication of this paper, Rao and other researchers have used various methods of statistical analysis to help in their work, with some success. Something unexpected which they uncovered was that artifacts found in different regions depicted noticeably different symbol sequences. So, for example, seals found in what is now Iraq have symbol sequences that are different from others found in India and Pakistan. This suggests that perhaps the same symbols were being used to encode the local language in the Indus Valley homeland, but elsewhere they were using the same script to write a different language. Although the Indus script has still not been decoded, Rao believes that until we find longer examples or a multilingual text, statistical methods are the best way to crack the code, even if it turns out not to be a language after all. In fact, if the mysterious Indus script does not encode a language, it may be even more interesting. According to computational theorist Richard Sprout, we know a lot about ancient civilizations that had writing, but we know a lot less about civilizations that lacked writing. And if this was some kind of general non-linguistic system, in a sense that would be much more interesting than if it was just some kind of script. Sprout made the news a few years ago when, along with comparative historian Steve Farmer and philologist Michael Witzel, he offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who finds a lengthy Indus inscription. So far, there have been no takers.
Kryptos is an enigmatic sculpture in a courtyard at the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Virginia. The sculpture holds an encrypted message that has not been fully decoded, despite numerous attempts to crack it. It's even mentioned by Dan Brown in his sensational book The Da Vinci Code. Recently, a new clue emerged which may help in finally solving the puzzle. The Kryptos sculpture. Kryptos is a 12-foot-tall copper, granite and wood sculpture by artist James Sanborn installed in 1990 in the grounds of CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are actually several parts to Kryptos, all scattered around the CIA headquarters. According to Sanborn, these other elements of the sculpture are significant pieces in the as-yet unsolved puzzle. The 1,800 characters on Kryptos, carved out of copper plate, contain encrypted messages, of which 3 have been solved to date. There remains a 4th section of code at the bottom consisting of 97 or 98 characters, which remains to this day uncracked. The first section of code is a poetic phrase composed by Sanborn himself. The second suggests something buried somewhere, whilst the third section is a quote from archaeologist Howard Carter's diary describing the opening of a door in King Tutankhamun's tomb on the 26th of November 1922. The first passage reads, "Slowly, desperately slowly, the remains of passage debris that encumbered the lower part of the doorway was removed. With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner, and then, widening the hole a little, I inserted a candle and peered in. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the flame to flicker, but presently details of the room within emerged from the mist. When decrypted, the mysterious second passage said, 'It was totally invisible. How is that possible? They used the Earth's magnetic field. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location. Does Langley know about this? They should. It's buried out there somewhere. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message. 38 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north, 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. When the sculpture was unveiled on the 3rd of November 1990, Sanborn believed it would be merely a matter of weeks before the code would be cracked, but that has not proved to be the case at all. The code still eludes even the professional code breakers of the CIA and the National Security Agency. Anyone trying to crack the code has been hampered by the fact that the encrypted sections include intentional spelling errors made by Sanborn and misaligned characters set higher on a line of text than those characters around them. It took more than 8 years for CIA analysts and a California computer scientist to crack 3 of the 4 coded messages on the Kryptos sculpture. However, in July 2013, a news article claimed that according to new documents obtained from the NSA, a small group of NSA crypto analysts had apparently deciphered the same 3 sections of Kryptos years earlier, allegedly in less than a month. It was the 3 analysts who solved the codes, one dealing with each section of the puzzle. Although the names are redacted in the documents released by the NSA, an article in the Baltimore Sun identified Dennis McDaniels as one of the codebreakers. The 4th section, however, had the McDaniels NSA codebreakers bewildered, as it had continued to do other cryptoanalysts for the last 30 years. Part of the mystery of the code on the Kryptos sculpture is that Sanborn was neither a professional code writer nor a mathematician. Yet somehow he had created a mysterious code that the top code breakers in the world had not been able to break. The artist admits, however, that he did have some guidance from Edward Sheet, an expert in cryptology and encryption and former chairman of the CIA's Cryptographic Center before he retired. They met in secret, and Sheet educated Sanborn on the subject of code in general, modern codes and contemporary coding systems. In a 2005 interview with Wired News, Sheet described how the code had been created. He said, "I provided the cryptographic process as well as worked with him with what he was looking to do as far as the story of the sculpture would tell. We came up with a methodology using some of the known cryptographic solutions." Someone who's been trying to solve Kryptos for 20 years is cryptologist and video game developer Ilonka Dunin. Sanborn once said of Dunin that she probably knows more about Kryptos than I know. Indeed, Dunin had such a reputation as a codebreaker that Dan Brown, author of the Da Vinci Code, even named a character in the book after her. Dunin has created a website dedicated to solving the code, which has grown into a network of people committed to the common goal of solving Kryptos. Dunin said of this network, "Our Kryptos community is made up of people from all around the world. We have thousands of people that are interested in Kryptos, either cracking it or helping to see it cracked. Some of them are professional codebreakers, some of them are students." Carl Wang, a student of the University of California, San Diego, has created a web page with the known solutions to the code, but says that the 3rd passage is far more difficult to crack than the first 2, whilst the 4th is on another level entirely. He says on the website, the first 2 parts are straightforward enough that nearly anybody with a simple education in cryptography can solve. The 3rd part is much more advanced, and the 4th part is borderline impossible. In the months after the sculpture was unveiled, Sanborn claimed that the only person who knew the solution to the Kryptos codes besides himself was William Webster, the CIA director at the time. More recently, however, Sanborn has mysteriously denied that this is the case, claiming that even Webster does not possess the whole solution of the puzzle. A new clue. In January 2020, the 74-year-old Sanborn finally released a final clue for those attempting to solve the 4th text on the Kryptos sculpture. That same month, he gave an interview on the US radio show All Things Considered about his decision to release a 3rd and final clue, which was the word northeast. The previous 2 clues were both Berlin and clock. In the interview, Sanborn described the 4th text as a 97-character phrase, and that phrase in itself is a riddle. It's mysterious. It's going to lead to something else. It's not going to be finished when it's decoded. He also added that he hoped no one would ever solve the mystery of Kryptos. He said, "I really do want Kryptos to remain secret. The plain text, the final section of Kryptos, I would prefer for it to remain secret indefinitely. Very artwork, I think. I mean, I would think that every artist would aspire to making an artwork that is not transient. It's a permanent visual, auditory, conceptual statement. And I did Kryptos with all those things in mind. And as an artist, one would prefer to have that piece continue giving rather than have it understood right off the bat and even more or less ignored. And so this has lived way beyond all of my expectations, at 30 years in retaining a secret that it has, and that's magic. Sanborn went on to discuss some fascinating aspects of code breaking, and its necessity for the present and future security of the US in the interview. He said, "Let's just say that if there are codes, if all codes could be cracked, then we'd be in pretty bad shape, because all national secrets, all kinds of things would be available to just about anyone. And so let's all hope that there are indecipherable codes out there, because they're often saving our lives. And so Kryptos obviously isn't that relevant, but it's hopefully doing something. It's certainly employing a lot of minds." The final code. But even if one day the final section of code is broken, we'll still not know what the sculpture means. The entire text contains a riddle which would require any investigators to be on the CIA grounds for them to solve it. Sanborn said in a 2005 interview, "In part of the code that's been deciphered, I refer to an act that took place when I was at the agency and a location that's on the ground of the agency. There has been speculation as to whether he's referring to something he buried on the CIA grounds, though nobody knows for sure." The decrypted text gives latitude and longitude coordinates. When Sanborn has explained, refer to locations of the agency. So anyone wanting to discover the final truth of Kryptos will first have to decipher the fourth code, then somehow find the way onto the CIA grounds and locate the place indicated by the coordinates in order to finally solve the mystery. Kryptos is Greek for hidden. If ever something was aptly named, it was the Kryptos sculpture. It's a mystery that's captivated the world for over 425 years. A colony vanished into thin air, leaving only two clues: the word Croatoan carved on a gatepost and crow carved on a tree. Countless theories have attempted to explain the whereabouts of the 115 men, women and children who first settled in Roanoke in 1587. Theories range from dangerous weather conditions, deadly diseases or massacres by Native Americans, even alien abduction. But the solution has remained elusive. In 1937, a man named L.E. Hammond walked into Emory University with a stone in his hand that bore a mysterious inscription. He claimed that he'd found it while driving through the woods of North Carolina. Upon examining this stone, a handful of scholars, including Dr. Hayward Jefferson Pierce, did not immediately declare the stone to be authentic, and that the necessary tools for such an inscription were likely to have been in the possession of the colonists. They became convinced that it had a message from members of the infamous lost Roanoke colony. So what is the Dare Stone? Actually, it should be known that there is technically more than one Dare Stone, since similar stones were also discovered after the initial one. The other ones, however, are for the most part considered to be fakes. Only the first one is the only one considered to possibly be authentic by scholars. The artifact is a quartz-rich stone with a mysterious inscription upon it. The inscription appears to be a 16th century English message from a woman named Eleanor White Dare, recounting what had happened to the Roanoke colonists. The message on the stone claims that most of the colonists passed away from illness or fell victim to battles with the hostile Native American factions. It specifically mentions the passing of her husband and their newborn daughter, Virginia. But is this true? Could the mystery really be that simple? Maybe not. After two other groups had previously landed at Roanoke Island, the first to explore and chart the area in 1584, and the second to unsuccessfully attempt a colony in 1586, before returning to England a year later, Governor John White, appointed by Sir Walter Raleigh, led a group of about 115 men, women and children, including his pregnant daughter Eleanor White Dare, to the site in 1587. Several weeks after they landed there on August the 18th, Eleanor gave birth to the first English baby born in the New World and named her Virginia Dare. This was the first known English-speaking settlement in the Americas. After establishing the colony, John White set sail to England to gather more supplies. When he arrived in England, however, his ship was commandeered by the English Navy to fight against the Spaniards. Because of this, John White was not able to return to the Roanoke colony for 3 years. In 1590, when he at last was able to return after finding a suitable ship, he discovered that the colony had disappeared, almost without a trace. To this day, no one really knows what happened to the Roanoke colonists. This mystery has led to a great deal of speculation regarding their fate. According to one author, the stone says that more than half the settlers died, and eventually there was news that a ship had arrived off the coast. The Native Americans worried the Europeans would take revenge, so they fled. Soon after that, the shamans warned of angry spirits, and all but 7 of the rest of the colonists were killed, including Eleanor's husband, Ananias, and their daughter Virginia. The stone says they were buried 4 miles east of this river, and their names have been written on a second rock. The Dare Stone was allegedly discovered in a swamp around 85 miles from Roanoke Island. When Mr. Hammond, a tourist from California, discovered it, he brought the stone to Emory University. The historians there were not really interested in investigating it. One professor, however, by the name of Howard Pierce, Jr., took great interest in it. He tried in vain to get the other historians to study it, but they took no interest. Pierce then took the stone to Brenau University in Gainesville, Georgia, where his father was president and he was also vice president, hoping to solve the mystery of the Dare Stone. The initial investigation into the stone appeared to reveal that it was, as predicted, genuine. A second opinion from an historian from Harvard, Samuel Eliot Morison, agreed that it was most likely a genuine artifact. This created a lot of excitement, as many scholars came to believe that the mystery of the Roanoke colonists' disappearance had finally been solved. It also spurred the alleged discovery of almost 50 other stones by 1941. They told a complicated tale of the fate of the lost colony. The stones were usually addressed to John White and called for revenge against the savages, or told Eleanor's father the direction taken by the missing colonists. One of the stones, dated 1592, indicated that the survivors had reached a safe haven in the Nakuchi Valley area and lived there in primeval splendor. Another stone, dated 1598, indicated that Eleanor had married the chief of the tribe, while another said that she bore the chief a daughter, that the tribe was furious and asked for White to send the infant girl to England. A team of historians examined the stones, commissioned by the Smithsonian Institution and led by historian Samuel Eliot Morison of Harvard University. They issued a preliminary report and gave them a measure of authenticity. The Dare Stone did much to place Brenau University in a position of importance. It also helped to advance the careers of the stone's main advocates. This made it all the more devastating when, in 1941, an article from the Saturday Evening Post dismissed the Dare Stone as a hoax without much academic evidence. Among the article's main arguments was that the linguistic style of the message didn't match the period. The text was entirely in Roman letters, when at the time only the well-educated upper class used Roman letters. Most people with some but not significant education tended to use Gothic script to write. Also, the article stated that the spelling was too consistent. Words in the message were always spelled in the same way, something that might not necessarily be expected in the 16th century, when there was no standardized spelling of English words. These facts, combined with the dubious discoveries of other stones after the first stone was found, were taken by the academic world to mean that the Dare Stone was all a hoax. This damaged some reputations, and the rock mysteriously disappeared from displays at Brenau University. However, since 1941, many people have also come forward defending the stone's authenticity. The other stones were largely dismissed as fakes, but the original stone is still considered by some scholars to likely be genuine, compounding young historians to take on the challenge of solving the mystery once and for all. As recently as 2016, Ed Schrader, the geologist and president of Brenau University, examined the type of stone used for the inscription. Using a sample taken from the stone, he discovered that the interior was a much lighter color than the weathered exterior. The interior was much more lightly colored than the inscription as well. The original inscription carved into the rock would have been much lighter compared to the weathered exterior. given that the current inscription is darker than the interior suggests that the inscription has aged, perhaps for several hundred years, through the darkening of its surface from weathering. Although such inscriptions can be made to look artificially darker with chemicals, this would have been difficult though in the 1930s. This fact alone makes it more likely that the inscription on the stone is a genuine 16th century artifact. Nonetheless, thorough geochemical analysis has not been made on the rock, and nothing else has been found that confirms the inscription as being of 16th century origin for certain. Additionally, more recent epigraphic analysis by Elizabethan scholars does not reveal anything that makes the rock obviously a hoax. However, there are some aspects of the inscription that do appear inconsistent with the time period or with the writing of Ellen Adair. These include certain word choices and the use of initials EWD to sign the inscription when use of initials was rare in the late 16th century. In 2015, a History Channel documentary reported that the stones were examined by a team of respected archaeologists, including Fred Willard, as well as Kevin Quarmby, a scholar of early modern literature and writing from Oxford College of Emory University. The documentary showed that the first stone was authentic and distinct from the other stones, which upon very close examination appeared to have been manufactured with a drill press. They found that the original stone is almost completely pure white vein quartz with amounts of gold, selenium and copper, which allowed the team to narrow down the possible location of the stone to an area in southern Virginia. It's not uncommon to find various trace elements in the rock, but what is uncommon is to find all four of them in one rock, so that narrows it down considerably as to where it might have come from. Drawing a conclusion on the Adair stone's authenticity is risky for scientists, though there are some scholars who do argue for its authenticity. At this point, more evidence is probably needed to confirm whether it is history or hoax. Scientists have said that if it is a hoax created in 1937, it is incredibly well done. The genuineness of this artifact will probably remain a mystery, as long as the story of the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists is also unexplained. This, of course, is because discovering the true story of the lost colony would instantly confirm or deny the historicity of the message of the Adair stone. An ancient Egyptian body, shrouded in wrappings covered in the writings of a lost language from a forgotten lost empire. It sounds like the plotline for the latest Dan Brown novel, but this isn't make-believe. The truth behind this amazing story is much stranger than fiction. Our obsession with all things Egyptian is not a new phenomenon, and for several hundred years Western cultures haven't been able to get enough of the civilization that gave birth to Cleopatra and Tutankhamun. As far back as the Middle Ages, historians and collectors from around the globe would purchase finds, then ship them back to Europe to be examined, displayed, and in some cases consumed. As strange as it sounds, only 100 years ago, it was quite normal for a mummy to be ground into powder, which the buyer would then consume, convinced that the mummified remains contained medicinal properties, which could fend off fevers, cure ailments, shrink tumors, and even improve one's libido. By the 1800s, any self-respecting, well-to-do gentleman had an Egyptian artifact or casket on display in their lounge or parlor. But there were only so many pharaohs to go around. And what most people don't realize is that whilst mummification started off as the exclusive means of burial for the kings and queens of Egypt, from 1500 BC onwards, it was commonplace for even low-ranking officials, priests and wealthy tradesmen to be embalmed in this way. Estimates suggest that during this period, over 75 million mummies were made. So there were more than enough to fulfill the Victorian era's appetite for Egyptology. In 1848, a Croatian official bought one such female mummy whilst on a tour of Alexandria. Returning home to Vienna, he displayed it in the corner of his sitting room. To add to the ghoulish titillation of his new ornament, the buyer had it stripped of its wrappings, which he also displayed in a separate glass case. By 1859, it had been donated to the Archaeological Museum in what is now Zagreb. There she lay for 8 years before a German Egyptologist noticed detailed drawings and markings upon the removed wrappings. Believing them to be hieroglyphs, The Egyptologists did not investigate further, and they were forgotten for another 10 years until a chance encounter with British explorer Richard Burton. Burton was an expert on runes, and he realized that the markings on the linen wrappings were not written in hieroglyphs, but some other ancient language. Although both men considered the wrappings may have been important, they wrongly believed that the writing was an Arabic translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and took the matter no further. However, they did understand that the wrappings were put in the correct sequence, could be read as a book, and they became known as the Liber Linteus, which is Latin for linen book. It was not until 1891, when the linen wrappings were examined by ancient language expert Jacob Krall, that the true origin of the markings was revealed. The writings that had encased the body were not hieroglyphs, nor were they Arabic, Coptic, or even cuneiform, for these wrappings were covered in the language spoken by a civilization that had disappeared over 2,500 years ago, the Etruscans. The Etruscans were a powerful and wealthy civilization of ancient Italy who were founded in approximately 700 BC. They inhabited part of the western central Italy, roughly the area of modern Tuscany. The exact origins of the Etruscans remain unclear, and much has been speculated about where they came from, with the ancient city of Troy and even Atlantis being touted as possibilities. Experts suggest that Etruscans originally lived in Sardinia until they were forced to flee the island after a huge tidal wave wiped out almost the entire population. This tsunami of biblical proportions destroyed the once powerful civilization of Sardinia in an instant, leaving only the mysterious megalithic towers that are scattered across the island and remain visible to this day. Sardinia is indeed known as the Island of Stone Towers, and is often referred to as Europe's answer to Easter Island. Little is known of the people who once inhabited the island of Sardinia, only that the civilization abruptly came to an end at the beginning of the Iron Age. This coincides with the same period in which the Etruscans made their appearance in central Italy, and recent discoveries have led geologists to conclude that the underwater volcano, named Marsili, still active off the coast of Italy, erupted in the 11th century BC. After the destruction of their island, those who survived were forced to escape to the mainland, giving birth to the Etruscan civilization. It's interesting to underline the fact that the Greeks called the Etruscans the Tyrsanoi, which actually means builders of towers. Bizarrely though, not a single tower has ever been found dating to the Etruscan age in Tuscany, while in Sardinia more than 7,000 prehistoric towers still stand. Experts have also noted that whilst the Etruscans were known as great seamen, they tended to build their cities far from the coast and above sea level, as if they feared the ocean which had previously betrayed them. The Etruscan cities were independent states linked to each other by a common religion, language and culture. They learned much from the Greeks, but they had their own distinctive character which influenced the neighbouring Italian people. They taught the French how to make wine, the Romans how to build roads, and introduced the art of writing into Europe. They were a dominant force in Europe, trading with the ancient Greeks and Celts before gradually declining, eventually being overwhelmed by the emergence of the Roman Empire a few hundred years later. Despite the riches of the Etruscans, very little is actually known about them, and much of their sculpture and artwork was destroyed by the Romans. But even more obscure is the language the Etruscans spoke, for there are few examples of it in existence. It's widely believed that the Etruscan language gradually died out as Latin became the dominant tongue of Italy, and Emperor Claudius was one of the last people to speak it fluently. Unfortunately, that would mean that the Etruscan language hasn't been spoken for over 1,000 years. What this meant for the experts studying the Liber Lineus was that whilst they had finally identified the language upon the wrappings, they had absolutely no idea how to read it. Even today, the Etruscan language is far from understood, and much of the translations are little more than educated guesswork. However, experts have been able to decipher certain words amongst the wrappings, including specific dates and the names of the gods the Etruscans were known to worship. They have therefore deduced that the wrappings are an elaborate religious book indicating specific holidays when gods were to be honoured, detailing the rituals and celebrations that took place to mark them. The basis of Etruscan religion was the idea that the destiny of man was determined by the whims and impulses of the many deities they worshipped. Like the ancient Greeks and Egyptians before them, the Etruscans worshipped a wide number of gods, but the most important one was Novenseals, who was made up of 9 gods of lightning, whose strikes were thought to be able to predict the future. Interestingly, the Etruscans were not the only great society to refer specifically to 9 gods. This phenomenon, known as the Divine Nine, includes the ancient Egyptians, who worshipped a group of 9 deities called the Great Ennead, the Mayans, who prayed to the 9 lords of the underworld, and the Chinese, who still celebrate the 9 emperor gods of ancient China. Each culture tells stories of kings and pharaohs consulting a pantheon on 9 celestial deities who guided these civilizations to prosperity and advancement. So, what was an Egyptian body doing wrapped in pieces of cloth decorated in the religious text of a forgotten language from an extinct civilization? Etruscan and Egyptian cultures were very similar, and both could be said to have a deep-rooted obsession with passing. Both societies featured burials involving elaborate rituals, ornately constructed tombs, and lavishly decorated sarcophagi. In actual fact, the most beautiful remnants left by the Etruscans are their tombs, which might be compared in magnificence to Hellenistic and Egyptian burial sites. Unlike ancient Egypt, Etruscan tombs were not sealed for eternity, but were instead both tombs and sacred sites in which to honor the memory of one's ancestors. Once a year, the Etruscans accessed the tombs, and a feast was held amongst the coffins of the past relatives, who were offered food and drink as a mark of respect. A sealed tomb meant the family had fallen in disgrace, since the memory of the ancestors couldn't be honored anymore. Whilst the Etruscan tombs were detailed and ornate, it was not thought that they emulated the Egyptians by building pyramids. At least that was the commonly held belief until a large pyramidal structure was unearthed in central Italy in 2010. More similar to a Mayan pyramid in its appearance, the exact purpose of this great structure remains unknown. However, many experts believe that the megalith acted as an altar for pagan religious rites. For this reason, the site holds the nickname Stone of the Preacher. Although we may never be certain about what took place at this pyramid, one of the world's highly respected authorities on the ancient Etruscans indicated that whilst historians have been reluctant to believe that they practiced sacrifice, recent excavations have proven once and for all that it was indeed practiced by the Etruscans, as archaeologists have discovered evidence of this. However, despite these recent findings, the Etruscans have remained an enigma throughout history. What little is known of them is obtained from the writings of ancient Roman scholars who speak of a people who had mastered the arts of magic and who would command lightning bolts to strike down their enemies. Yet, despite these grand descriptions, these powers could not prevent the Roman Empire from overthrowing the Etruscans, and this may explain how one of their ancient religious texts ended up encasing the body in an Egyptian tomb. It's widely known that the Etruscans had a healthy trade route with Egypt, exchanging their superior bronze and ironwork for Egyptian amber and ivory. This may explain how the linen book ended up so far away from its Italian origins. Initially, historians had proposed that the Liber Lineus find was an Etruscan woman who had fled to Egypt when the Romans started to take over her homeland. She then died in Egypt and, in accordance with her wishes, was embalmed within the sacred text of her religion. Unfortunately, the one clue available to scholars is a piece of papyrus that was discovered amongst the wrappings, and this casts extreme doubt on this theory. Written in understandable Egyptian hieroglyphs, the papyrus identifies her as an Egyptian woman named Nessie Hensu, the wife of a prominent tailor who lived in the Egyptian city of Thebes. But the piece of papyrus offers no clues as to why she had been buried in linen wrappings covered in a language and religion that was foreign to her. Experts have therefore offered another theory, suggesting that the mummy and the wrappings are entirely unconnected. They speculate that the wealthy Egyptian woman may have died suddenly. Eager to begin the embalming process as soon as possible, the priests were forced to use whatever linen wrappings were available, and so tore up the Etruscan linen book in an act of desperation. The presence of mysterious graffiti, possibly made by the Knights Templar in a fortified town in southwestern France and at various locations in England, has prompted an investigation into their possible meanings. The mystical graffiti at Dom Prison Castle, which includes strange depictions of the Holy Grail, was of similar design to alleged Templar images carved into the walls of the mysterious site of Royston Caves in England, though the authorship of the carvings at both sites has been hotly disputed. The end of the Knights Templar. After the defeat of Knights Templar forces in the Holy Land in 1291, the Christian hold on the Holy Land effectively ended. With the Crusades over and the Dome Holy Land lost, many also began to question what purpose the Knights Templars served now that the reason for their existence was gone. The wealth and power enjoyed by the order, with its exemption from taxes and huge landholdings throughout Europe, had made them many, often dangerous enemies. In the end, this was to be their undoing. On a Friday in October 1307, King Philip IV, the Fair of France, had all the Templars he could find in the country simultaneously arrested and imprisoned. Philip also seized all the knights' property and possessions, accusing the order en masse with a variety of heretical crimes, including spitting and trampling on the cross, homosexuality, and worshipping of an idol. A number of the Templars were subsequently tortured by inquisitors until the required confessions were extracted, and were then executed. It's highly unlikely that confessions obtained under such conditions had any basis in fact. In 1314, the remaining Templar leaders, including the last Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were burnt at the stake in front of Notre Dame Cathedral on the Île de la Cité, an island in the River Seine. Apparently, before becoming enveloped by the flames, de Molay is said to have prophesied that Philip IV and his co-conspirator, Pope Clement V, would be dead within the year. Whether this happened or not, it is true that both men died within a year of the Grand Master's execution. With the death of de Molay, ended the turbulent 200-year existence of the Knights Templar. This, at any rate, is the conventional story. Other European monarchs remained unconvinced of the Templars' guilt, even after Pope Clement V, under the influence of Philip, had officially disbanded the order in 1312. In England, though, many knights were arrested and tried. The majority were found not guilty. Some escaped to Scotland at the time under the control of the excommunicated Robert the Bruce, and therefore unaffected by the papal bull outlawing the order. The sudden end of the Knights Templar and the apparently complete disappearance of the order and its assets has fueled a large amount of legend and extreme theories involving the knights. While it is true that the Templars were partly absorbed into other orders, it is not clear what became of the estimated 15,000 Templar houses, their fleet of ships, their vast archive detailing their business holdings and financial transactions, and the Templars themselves. There were tens of thousands of Templars across Europe, only a small proportion of which were tortured and executed. What happened to them all? In England, the county of Hertfordshire allegedly became a sanctuary for fugitive knights from all over Europe. The town of Baldock in Hertfordshire was founded by the Templars, and from 1199 to 1254 it had been the order's English headquarters. It's certainly plausible that after the official censure of the orders of the Templars continued as normal, but meeting in secret hidden rooms, cellars and caves. The graffiti at Dom Prison Castle. Dom is a commune located 820 feet above sea level on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Dordogne River, in the Dordogne department of southwestern France. Dom is a fortified medieval town founded in 1281 by Philip III, known as Philip the Bold, King of France from 1270 until his death in 1285. In the early 14th century, many Knight Templars were imprisoned in Dom during the trial against them. Testimony to this imprisonment is Templar graffiti inscribed on the walls of the Tower Gate, the building where they were held between 1307 and 1318. For some Templar researchers, these graffiti carvings are a unique insight into the innermost thoughts and beliefs of the order. One of the Templar inscriptions on the wall reads 1307, the date when the Order of the Knights Templar was officially dissolved by the decrees of Pope Clement V. Many of the carvings employ a code that the Templars used to represent both themselves and their fate. So, for example, an octagon meant the Holy Grail, a square, the Temple on the Mount, a circle around this square meant imprisonment, and a triangle with a cross on top was to represent Calvary, where Christ was crucified. There are also more abstract signs and symbols of less clear meaning, and recently researchers have discovered other inscriptions that were invisible to the naked eye. Unfortunately, these carvings have not been published. Royston Caves. For some researchers into the Knights Templar, Royston Cave in Hertfordshire, located at the crossing of two Roman roads, the Icknield Way and Ermine Street, was once a Templar meeting place. The cave has a number of medieval carvings on the wall, many of them pagan, but also figures thought to be St. Catherine, St. Lawrence and St. Christopher, saints known to be revered by the Templars. Support for the theory that it was used by the Templars comes in the form of the similar carvings not only at Dom, but also at the Tour de Caudray in Chinon, France, where in 1307 Templar knights were imprisoned before their execution. It has even been postulated that one of the carvings at Royston represents the burning at the stake of the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay. Former custodian of Royston Cave, Peter Holdcroft, author of the 1998 book, A Pictorial Guide to the Royston Cave, takes the place's connection even further than the Knights Templar, bringing in the Holy Grail and the Illuminati, though based on what evidence is not clear. Although the possibility of the Knights Templar using Royston Cave as a place of refuge is not unfeasible, it has to be borne in mind that the bloodthirsty persecution of the order in France did not extend to England. This is one reason why between October 1307 and January 1308 many Templars fled to the country for safety. Though a few Templars were arrested in England, and there was a trial that took place from the 22nd of October 1309 until the 18th of March 1310, most remained free to find another place in society after the dissolution of their order. Despite the romantic appeal of the idea of the Templars meeting secretly at Royston, in light of the situation in England at the time, it seems unlikely that the order would have found it necessary for clandestine subterranean meetings in places such as Royston Cave. The most probable explanation for the use of Royston Cave is decidedly more prosaic. The late 13th century castle at Sloop in the Liberec region of the Czech Republic, there is a chamber in the castle that seems to have been used as a prison, and later in the 17th century as a hermitage. Carvings illustrating religious themes have been discovered on the walls there. Taking the discoveries at Sloop with similar examples from Carlisle Castle in the north of England, which date from the 1480s, long after the Knights Templar, it's a distinct possibility that Royston Cave was used as a prison at some stage in its history. There is documentary evidence that Royston Cave was almost certainly being used as a hermitage in the late 15th, early 16th century, which would suggest that it probably originated as a hermitage, probably for use by anchorites from nearby 12th century Augustinian priory, and was later converted into a prison. However, a number of the carvings at the cave remain enigmatic and may not be linked to the cave's use as a hermitage or prison. One of these carvings is the so-called Sheila Nagig, a figurative stone carving of a naked woman, sometimes found in churches and castles from the 11th to the 13th centuries, particularly in Britain and Ireland, but also in France, Spain and Norway. But what was one doing at Royston Cave? Some researchers believe that the only explanation is that this example of Sheila Nagig may in fact be a pagan Celtic survival, which would put the beginnings of the cave back hundreds of years, perhaps even into the pre-Roman Iron Age, more than 2,000 years ago. Bearing in mind the uniqueness and importance of the Royston Cave, one wonders what fascinating discoveries would result from a full investigation into its carvings and the excavation on the cave floor. Controversy over the Shakespearean authorship is not new. It has existed ever since the 18th century. For some, Shakespeare's plays must have been written by a more obviously accomplished writer, such as Edward de Vere, the 7th century of Oxford, Sir Francis Bacon, the playwright Christopher Marlowe, Sir Walter Raleigh, John Donne, and even Queen Elizabeth I. But could these plays have been authored jointly by a mysterious group called the Knights of the Helmet? This invisible order, dedicated to Pallas Athene, seems to have started at Gray's Inn, London, with Francis Bacon, the acknowledged leader of an extremely talented group of Rosicrucians and Freemasons. Francis Bacon and the Knights of the Helmet. Francis Bacon, one of the leading figures in natural philosophy and in the field of scientific methodology, was born on the 22nd of January 1561 in London, the son of Sir Nicholas Bacon, keeper of the Great Seal for Elizabeth I. Bacon studied at Cambridge University and at Gray's Inn and became a Member of Parliament in 1584. Bacon's political career prospered, and in 1618 he was appointed Lord Chancellor, the most powerful position in England, and in 1621 he was created Viscount St Albans. However, soon after this, he was charged by Parliament with accepting bribes, which he admitted. He was later fined and imprisoned and then banished from court. Although he was later pardoned, this was the end of Bacon's political life. He retired to his home at Gorhambury in Hertfordshire and died in London on the 9th of April 1626. There are certainly some mysteries surrounding Bacon's life. He's believed by some researchers to have been a member of a number of secret societies, including a Freemasons and German secret philosophical society, the Rosicrucians. Another mysterious organization which Bacon was allegedly a member of was the Knights of the Helmet, an order dedicated to Pallas Athene, who carried a spear and wore a great helmet, a symbol of secrecy. According to Greek myth, anyone who wears the helmet becomes invisible. This society was a gifted group of gentlemen based at Gray's Inn, London, of whom Francis Bacon was the acknowledged leader. Some Baconian scholars believe that the idea behind this group was to create a series of classical literary works which would educate the English people and transform them into a nation that one day would dominate the world. Other researchers take this a step further, claiming that the Knights of the Helmet conceal the fact that Bacon actually was Shakespeare, and that Shakespeare is a synonym for Apollo and Athena. They were both known as Shakers of the Spear, and the spear represents a ray of wisdom. Is it possible that the Shakespeare plays were written as a collective work by the Knights of the Helmet? This would explain why Bacon employed such a large group of writers, poets, code breakers, and other educated people around him. In his 1928 work, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Canadian author and mystic Manly P. Hall wrote about the mysteries surrounding Bacon and Shakespeare, saying, "The Bacon-Shakespeare controversy involves the most profound aspects of science, religion, and ethics. He who solves its mystery may yet find therein the key to the supposedly lost wisdom of antiquity." Even though most advocates for someone other than Shakespeare having written plays do not take the Knights of the Helmet theory seriously, they still believe that Bacon is the leading contender for their authorship. In the search for the real author of Shakespeare's plays in the late 19th century, American writer Delia Bacon proposed that the author was none other than Sir Francis Bacon, to whom she was not actually related. Her vehement arguments against Shakespeare as the author of the plays eventually reached the ears of a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi, Samuel Clemens, who would later become the most famous writer in the United States, Mark Twain. But it was not until the very end of his career that Twain returned to Delia Bacon's theories. At a dinner at his house in January 1909, Twain's circle of friends proved to themselves that it was possible to find the coded signature Francisco Bacono in a sequence of letters from the first folio of Shakespeare's plays. So, could Francis Bacon have authored the plays? Bacon was born 3 years before Shakespeare and certainly possessed the intellectual ability and knowledge to have written the plays. Shakespeare could not have known the workings of the court, both in England and on the continent, whereas Bacon knew the court extremely well. Well, he was brought up in it. Fortunately, some of Bacon's plays or court entertainments survive. Unfortunately, they're totally lacking in literary ability and artistic style. with stock characters, no grasp of a plot, and a distinct lack of ability to describe characters. In short, these works are about as far away from Shakespeare's plays as it was possible to be at the time. But what of Shakespeare himself? Could he be the author of the Shakespearean plays? William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire, England, and died on the 23rd of April 1616 in Stratford-upon-Avon. There is a large amount of factual knowledge about Shakespeare, but unfortunately the majority of it comes from official documents. Documents concerning the great writer include dates of baptisms, marriages, deaths and burials, wills, conveyances, legal processes, and payments by the court. There are also, however, a number of contemporary references to him as a writer. At the age of 18, Shakespeare was married, though where and exactly when are unknown, but there is evidence in the form of a marriage license which was issued for the marriage of William Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway of Stratford. On the 26th of May, 1583, the couple's first child, a daughter named Susanna, was baptized in a Stratford church. On the 2nd of February, 1585, twins were baptized, Hamnet and Judith. Hamnet, Shakespeare's only son, died 11 years later. The great enigma of Shakespeare's life, and one that has led to much controversy, including that over the authorship of his plays, is what happened to him next. The 8 years between the birth of his twins and when his name begins to appear in London theatre records are a complete mystery. Theories as to what happened to Shakespeare during these lost years include that he travelled around England and abroad, worked as a schoolmaster in the country, was a soldier and law clerk, or became a devoted member of the Roman Catholic Church. Many scholars believe that when the London theatres were closed by order of the Privy Council on June the 23rd, 1592, Shakespeare had already been working as an actor and writer on the professional stage in London for 4 or 5 years, which would account for most of the lost time of his life. The authorities closed the theatres as they had been worried about a severe outbreak of the plague and concerned at the possibility of civil unrest due to their decision. When the theatre eventually reopened in June 1594, the theatrical companies had been reorganised, and Shakespeare was a full member of a theatre troupe known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men, who in 1603 became the King's Men. By 1592, Shakespeare was already well known enough as a writer to have been the subject of Robert Greene's attack on what he called the upstart crow in Greene's Groatsworth of Wit. However, play scripts and their authors were generally given low status in the literary system of the time, and when scripts were published, it was their connection with the theatrical company rather than to the scriptwriter which was publicised. Shakespeare had to wait until 1597 for his name to appear on the title page of his plays Richard II and a revised edition of Romeo and Juliet. One significant piece of evidence that Shakespeare was now enjoying great success as a playwright and was trying to help out his family is the fact that a coat of arms was granted to his father, John Shakespeare, in 1596. Altogether, Shakespeare's complete works include 38 plays, 2 narrative poems, 154 sonnets, and a variety of other poems. No original manuscripts of Shakespeare's plays are known to exist today, though of course some may be held in private collections. It's essentially due to a group of actors from Shakespeare's company that we have about half of his plays today. This group collected them for publication after Shakespeare died, preserving the plays. The writings were later collected together in what is known as the First Folio. Folio refers to the size of the paper used. This contained 36 of his plays, but none of his poetry. The question of whether Shakespeare actually wrote his plays is an extremely controversial one, but it has to be said that readers and theatre-goers in Shakespeare's own lifetime, and up until the late 18th century, never questioned Shakespeare's authorship of his plays. He was a well-known actor from Stratford who performed in London's leading acting company, among the great actors of the day. Shakespeare was also widely known by leading writers of the time, including Ben Jonson and John Webster, both of whom admired him as a dramatist. Many other tributes to him as an extremely talented writer appeared during his lifetime. Consequently, any theory that suggests that he was not the writer of the plays and poems attributed to him must assume that Shakespeare's contemporaries were universally fooled by some type of secret arrangement, a huge literary hoax, which is surely an absurd idea. Modern humans, in terms of anatomy and behavior, have been around for at least 50,000 years. And although it is presumed that the earliest ones had some kind of language, writing, the thing that truly differentiates us from ancestral hominids and all the other creatures of this world didn't really appear until much later, about 3,400 BC in ancient Sumer, Mesopotamia. Symbols existed before this, but probably weren't actually tied to language per se. And words are not just conveyors of thought and meaning, but can also give insights into human culture and history. And sometimes they can even reveal the existence of civilizations that, otherwise, have disappeared almost without trace. There is very little water in Jordan's Black Desert, as the name implies, and yet 2,000 years ago, an area within it, known as Jebel Kerma, appears to have supported a large population, living in green pastures abundantly populated with wildlife. Recently, rock etchings have been uncovered in their thousands that are inscribed with drawings and text that tell of this distant, verdant past. The script is called Sophiatic, which is related to Old Arabic, but a nightmare to figure out because there's little consistency in letter shapes, spelling, or grammar. Some etchings are just people's names. Some express concern about loved ones who are missing in battle, and one suggests that there was tension between the Jebel Kerma society, their Nabatean neighbors, who built the beautiful city of Petra. It says, "I am on the lookout for Nabateans." The petroglyphs, or rock art, show images of lions, antelopes, horses, and ostriches. Myriad heaps of charcoal clearly indicate the existence of water, as this shows that trees must have existed here 2,000 years ago, though no one is sure why this area dried up so dramatically. Inscriptions can also solve mysteries that, previously, had puzzled archaeologists. To historians interested in ancient Rome, Gargilius Antigas is a familiar name. It was known that he ruled part of the Roman Empire. But which part? No one knew. That is, until very recently, when archaeologists found a huge rock underwater off Israel's Mediterranean coast. Several lines of Latin were inscribed on what appears to have been the base of the statue. They specifically mentioned Antiochus as the Roman governor of Judea in around 130 AD. This was just before the famous Bar Kokhba uprising, the Jewish revolt against Roman rule that occurred in the years AD 132 to 136. So that mystery is solved. He ruled Judea. A similar Kilroy Wazir revelation occurred in Bulgaria. Nowadays, it's not uncommon that when a location is visited by a major dignitary or celebrity, some kind of plaque or memorial will be made in their honor. The same thing happened in antiquity. The Romans built forts throughout Bulgaria. Indeed, the famous Sostra fortress has been studied since 2002 by the Bulgarian National Museum of History. It housed up to 1,000 soldiers, according to the base of the statue found nearby. Eventually, the fort grew into a major town with a civilian population. In 2016, a roadside pillar was discovered nearby with 19 lines of Latin on the 7-foot-tall object. According to the inscription, it was erected to honor the Roman Emperor Philip the Arab and his son Philip the Younger. It's assumed that the emperor had visited the site around 244 AD as he traveled across the Balkans to solidify his command. And sometimes the power of just one word can unravel a riddle. In 2016, archaeologists found a broken stela in the Krasnodar region of Russia. They were a bit puzzled. The pillar was made of marble, which is not native to the region. The site was originally called Phainagoria, an ancient Greek colony, founded in the 6th century BC. The city was immensely important as it was the economic and cultural center of the Black Sea territory. It is known to have been destroyed in the 10th century AD by Viking invaders from Scandinavia, known as the Rus, and possibly the source of the name Russia. Archaeologists have successfully translated the ancient Persian script. It praises King Darius I's victory over Greece's attempts to subdue his country, Persia, in 494 BC. No one was sure where the Greek resistance had been crushed, and the script held the answer. It was Miletus, a city in present-day Turkey. It is presumed that the stela was erected in Miletus, where marble is found, and sometime later transported to Phanagoria, probably as nothing more than a ship's ballast. Although it had an ignoble end, it has revealed important clues for historians of ancient Greece and its struggles against disruptive colonies. Clues about ancient attitudes can also be uncovered by looking at inscriptions. 2,200 years ago, a group of young Turkish men decided to rent out a property that they'd inherited in Teos. Nowadays, leases are typically in electronic form or printed on paper, but not back then. Extraordinary as it may seem, the details were chiseled onto a stone stela, standing 5 feet tall and erected at the site's Dionysus temple. These students, or neos, were a strict bunch, because in addition to the names of the tenants and witnesses, the occupation rules were listed along with severe punishments that would be meted out for missed rent, inappropriate use of the building, or damage to it. They also insisted on a vacant possession of their property 3 days a year, without rebate. This carved rental agreement is the only such example found anywhere in the world, and gives researchers a rare insight into the early Mediterranean society and its draconian laws. Love makes the world go round, apparently, and messages of love, written or inscribed, are common in all human cultures. In 1962, American country-style rock and roll duo the Everly Brothers released a song, That's Old-Fashioned, with the line, "And we carve our initials in the old oak tree." They certainly weren't the first and certainly won't be the last to do that. But if you're on an island, more or less devoid of trees, what do you do when you and your lover want to declare your love and make your mark? Answer: carve it into the rocks. And that's what happened, at least 2,500 years ago, on the Greek island of Astipalaya. The island is largely made up of dolomite limestone, a fairly soft mineral that makes up about 2% of the Earth's crust and is commonly used after crushing, treating and purifying as a medicine to neutralize stomach acid. Apart from quite a few rather explicit drawings, the lovers on this island have written charming messages about their mutual affection. The standard of literacy is quite remarkable, showing that, in ancient Greece, ordinary folk were more highly educated than previously thought. This was an important rewriting of our understanding of culture and history, as was the discovery that our negative perceptions of European colonialism might not be entirely fair. Europeans have always been accused of bringing death and destruction to the lands they conquered. Though this is true to some extent, there is evidence that, initially, at least, it wasn't always the case. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, goes the popular verse, and 2 years later he discovered the Caribbean island of Mona. The natives there lived in immense, deep cave networks and decorated their walls with drawings and writings. In 2013, Mona's caves were revisited by scholars. It was already known that the walls were richly adorned with superb images of hunters, animals and landscapes, but the researchers discovered something new. It was always thought that the Caribbean folk had no written language. This was probably true of their own language, but on the walls the scholars found phrases, clumsily written in Spanish and Latin, and to their surprise, lots of Christian symbols. It suggests that in those early years, the colonists had taught them writing, albeit not of their native tongue, and had introduced them to Christianity. Sometimes, however, the discovery of ancient writing and inscriptions can lead not to revelations like the ones we've looked at, but to tantalizing uncertainties that await resolution by researchers, like yourselves perhaps, who won't take "don't know" for an answer. The Kayamoks are an indigenous people who, for thousands of years, occupied the shores of eastern Vancouver Island on the west of Canada. They call that area the Land of Plenty. They had a sophisticated culture which included masked dances and rhythmic songs. In 2015, their modern council, known as the Comox First Nation or Comox Indian Band, gathered for a barbecue in the Comox Valley. Following their traditions, they started to dig a roasting pit, and they were surprised to find that they were excavating large numbers of ancient seashells. They realized that they'd stumbled upon something of historical significance. The following year, a team of archaeologists began a formal excavation. They found not just shells, but over 80 mysterious flat stones and tablets, along with clear evidence of a long-lost village. Each stone was inscribed with a symbol, including images of a feather, a tree, and what is known to be a fertility symbol. Experts are trying to decipher the inscriptions, but with their being over 2,000 years old and badly worn, this is proving very difficult. Difficult hardly describes the problem facing some language scholars who, through finding a totally unknown script, are on the verge of rolling back the linguistic timeline. Until 2003, it was thought that the written Chinese language was created about 3,600 years ago at the tail end of the Shang dynasty. Characters were found carved into animal bones, which became known as the oracle bones. However, following the discovery of Neolithic shards near Shanghai, this has been pushed back by an astonishing 1,400 years. 200 fragments of jade, bone, wood, ivory, pottery and stone, all with clear linguistic inscriptions, have been excavated at the remarkable Zhuangqiu excavation site. The character appears very similar to those used today and are made up of 2 to 5 strokes. There's much argument about whether they are words, hieroglyphs or symbols. The clue that they may indeed be words is that they appear to be strung together in sentences. According to Genesis, in the beginning was the Word, and our studies of the use and understandings of words tell us much about our shared human beginnings.